Hello everyone. So we're starting with chapter number 12, that is your law relating to consumer protection, or otherwise known as your Consumer Protection Act. Okay. In terms of a quick overview of what exactly this chapter is about, first of all, it's about consumer protection as the chapter already states. But what we'll be looking at a lot in this chapter is we'll be looking at definitions. We're going to be looking at case laws, a lot about the consumer redressal forums, the different types that exist, what are the, I won't exactly call remedies, but who are the authorities, how do we apply to them, what kind of remedies can we claim from these consumer protection councils, and then obviously we'll be studying about all the authorities under this law and basically about what amounts to consumer protection. In terms of weightage of this chapter, I will consider this chapter as very, very important from an exam point of view as well as difficulty level. Okay, difficulty level comes from understanding, so there is a lot of requirement for reading this chapter. So even apart from the main reason why I'm taking out the textbook itself for this particular chapter is because I want you all to address each and every line in this chapter. So reading is very, very important. Case laws is very, very important. Okay, I'd prefer if everyone made a table of sorts and wrote down case laws and practiced it. Even though I'll be providing you with these case laws, it is still a good practice for you to remember it this way. Okay, so let's start with the chapter itself. Like I said, the first part that we're going to be looking at is the introduction, the framework, as well as the definitions in this particular chapter. Now, the regulatory framework we refer to as what are the laws that exist for the purpose of consumer protection, and the main law that you have is the Consumer Protection Act of 2019. After that, if you notice, everything are a set of rules that were created, rules and regulations that were created from time to time. Okay, what is the difference between an act and rules? I'll quickly go into the difference. An act is made by the legislature. Who is the legislature? Your parliament, your state legislative assembly. This body creates your laws, or they make your laws. So the legislature would have passed the Consumer Protection Act of 2019. But just because a law is coming into effect doesn't mean that the parliamentarians who are sitting in parliament are going to know every technical detail about how this law is to be applied on a daily basis. So what they tend to do is the legislature will delegate the work to some delegated authority. Now, this delegated authority will be a set of experts in the consumer protection law, and therefore this delegated authority will create something known as rules and regulations. This is a very, very simple breakup of what is the difference between acts, rules and regulations. If you are a jurisprudence student, by now you will already know this difference. This is purely for the students who are directly approaching module 2 for the first time. Okay, so we have the Consumer Protection Act and we have a bunch of rules and regulations. Now, from an exam point of view, is this important? It's not so important that you need to mug up all of them, but do try to understand and remember some of these rules and regulations. Okay, I cannot stress enough, as I've been telling you all time and again, that this subject involves a lot to do with reading. So for the introduction part, I will expect you all to read, but I will be giving you a breakup of what exactly is happening in this entire the introduction. So what exactly is this consumer protection law? Is that consumer is you and I. Every single day you and I consume things, whether it is food items, whether it is clothing, whether it is shelter. We approach, let's say I wish to go and take out rent out a property. I am a consumer. If I am consuming a biscuit, then I am a consumer. If I wish to buy some medicines, then I am a consumer. That is what a consumer is. And consumers essentially drive the entire economy. Okay, because as a consumer, as a consumer, what would you expect when you buy products? You will expect quality, you will expect good quantity, you would expect a lesser price for the product, but most importantly, you would like a choice. So, just to put that down, a consumer will always look at quality, will look at quantity, and for this quantity he will try finding the product with a lesser price and high quality, obviously. Okay, and he will also wish to have a choice. So if today I wish to go and buy soap or shampoo, I am not presented with just one option, I have multiple options. Okay, this is what is the objective of consumer protection. But what do we see on a daily basis around us? We see low quality products. Okay. We see low quality products for a lower quantity, which comes out for a higher price, and then most often than not, we don't have a choice. And this is where consumer protection really came in, because they said that, see, there are multiple practices to provide consumers with multiple options, and whether this is advertisements, whether this is some form of telemarketing, any kind of unfair trade practices, any kind of activity that is detrimental to the consumer. Now, why am I talking about advertisements? Simple. Let's assume I'm a fan of Deepika Padukone, or I'm a fan of, if you all know the Tamil actress Nayanthara. So if I see any of these actresses using any particular product, then even I want to use that product. Or if I see someone as a celebrity, or if I see a well-known brand, like let's say we see Johnson & Johnson baby powder. It was considered as one of the safest. It was automatically assumed that Johnson & Johnson baby powder would be very, very good. But then later it was found out that it could have held certain chemicals that are not good for the human body, especially babies. Okay, so misleading advertisements, or getting consumers to buy certain products just to push it out into the market is actually detrimental to the consumers. Okay, and therefore, since this started gaining so much traction, so many people started actively providing consumers with low quality, less quantity, high priced goods, etc. This is where consumer law has eventually come into play. That is why this Consumer Protection Act of 1986 has also come into play. Now, if you look at the law itself, it has undergone a lot of changes. Okay, it has been amended multiple times, while keeping the objective of the law as best as possible with the changing with the changing environment. So if we look at the preamble of this Consumer Protection Act, which we will look at and which I will classify as pretty important, this Consumer Protection Act of 2019 states that it is made for the protection of the interest of consumers and to establish authorities for the timely and effective administration and settlement of consumer disputes and any other matters incidental thereto. So what is their main objective over here? First one is protection of consumers. That is their main purpose. And how do you protect? If you have to protect consumers, you need to have some kind of authority in place. Then those authorities must have an established mechanism that, okay, if a consumer is being cheated, then he can approach said authorities and he can file a complaint. So therefore they are saying that we'll establish authorities for dealing with consumer disputes. So not just disputes, to also provide remedies. Okay, so this is your main objective and preamble of your Consumer Protection Act of 2019. Coming down to, we have the Om Prakash versus Reliance General Insurance and others, wherein this is a Supreme Court judgment. The Supreme Court merely highlighted the objective of the Consumer Protection Act, and they went ahead to say that, we'll read it. Observe that there is no emphasis that the Consumer Protection Act aims at providing better protection of the interest of consumers. It is a beneficial legislation that deserves liberal construction, and it is this laudable object must not be forgotten while considering claims under the Act. So, this is one part of the case law that was given. We'll also look at the next case law, that is, we have the MGF Land Limited versus Aftab Singh review petition, wherein they said that the Act was enacted to provide for better protection of consumers and to establish consumer councils for the settlement of disputes and matters connected therewith. And when we come back to the first case of Om Prakash versus Reliance Insurance, they're saying that it's a beneficial legislation. That means you must not interpret this law in its strict aspect. It is a law that must be given its widest interpretation possible. All those students who have studied through jurisprudence would completely understand what you mean by beneficial legislation and liberal construction. It simply means that the law aims to protect, it does not aim to merely punish, and therefore it must be given the widest interpretation possible. Now, after that, if we look at the case law in Lucknow Development versus MK Gupta, this I won't be reading out for you, this you will be reading on your own. They go into a lot of understanding as to what is the real purpose of the Consumer Protection Act of 2019 and with what objective must it be read with. Coming down, we're looking at the main features of the Consumer Protection Act of 2019. First, we have e-commerce, direct selling, establishment of someone known as the Central Consumer Protection Authority, norms for misleading advertisement, norms for product liability, what is the jurisdiction, unfair trade practices, unfair contracts, and ADR through mediation. So, obviously, the Consumer Protection Act has come in to protect the consumers, and your ADR, alternate dispute resolution, includes things such as arbitration, conciliation, mediation, and negotiation. Okay, let's look at each one of them, but before that, we are going through the important definitions. Now, you may ask, ma'am, what is the importance of definitions with regards to any chapter? It is very, very important. I have told you time and again, whenever you're writing answers, it is always a good practice to take the definition, write that definition first, and then go ahead with the answer, especially if there is a higher marking or a weightage to these definitions. Some of these definitions are simple, some are difficult. It's not always required that you have to write it word by word, you can even write it in your own words. So let's look at the first two main definitions, that is your complainant and your complaint. Who is a complainant? That is, who is the person who can approach the consumer authorities and file a complaint? First and foremost, a consumer can approach the Consumer Protection Court. Okay. Second is, a group of consumers can come together and then they can go and file a complaint, and that is who we call as a voluntary consumer association. But the only clause is that they must be registered under some law. Under some law, they must be registered either as a trust or as an association or a voluntary consumer association. The central or the state government can also be the complainant. Okay. Any central authority. Apart from the central government and state governments, we have multiple central authorities that can take action. One or more consumers, where numerous consumers are having the same interest. Let's assume that all of us have eaten a biscuit from a particular company. I'm not naming anything over here. All of us have eaten that biscuit, and all of the people who've eaten that batch of biscuits have contracted a particular a rash. Okay, so we can say that more than 20,000 people have been affected, but out of the 20,000 people, 1 or 2 people come together and they say, okay, we'll file this suit on behalf of the 20,000 people who have been affected. That is also allowed. In case of death of the consumer, his legal representative or legal heir can also move forward. So, let's say I consumed that particular biscuit and I got a rash. For whatever reason, I am no longer here. Now, let's say I have a legal heir or a representative. That person goes and files his complaint on behalf of me. Can they actually reject his complaint by saying, see, you didn't eat the biscuit, right? You are merely representing a person who ate the biscuit. Now, because you didn't eat the biscuit, we won't accept your complaint. No, it doesn't work that way. A legal heir or a legal representative can carry on the work of the consumer in case of his death. And similarly, if he is a minor, his parent or legal guardian can help him file this particular suit. So, complainant definition is very, very simple. It is a consumer or voluntary consumer association. Central government, state government, any central authority. When there are multiple consumers involved, 1 or 2 consumers representing the 20,000 people. In case of death of consumer, his legal heir or representative. In case of a consumer being a minor, his parent or legal guardian. Now we're coming to what exactly is a complaint. Mark this as very, very important. I want you to break down this entire definition of complaint and study it. Okay. What is a complaint? It has to be some form of allegation in writing. Complaint itself means that only you are alleging something against someone, and they're making this complaint. Who is making the complaint? The complainant is making this complaint for obtaining any reliefs provided under this act. Okay, that. And then they've mentioned multiple points for you under this particular thing, that is almost 7 points as to how you can, why you can approach the consumer councils. The first one being an unfair contract or an unfair trade practice or a restrictive trade practice has been adopted by any trader or service provider. What do you mean by unfair contracts or unfair trade practice? If I am able to source, say, 1 kg of sugar outside, like wherever, for let's say 100 rupees a kg. Am I saying 100 rupees? I'm able to source it for 35 rupees a kg. But for whatever reason, only in Tamil Nadu, the residents of Tamil Nadu have to pay 55 rupees for a kg of sugar. Now, this could be because someone in Tamil Nadu is imposing an unfair trade practice on the residents of Tamil Nadu, such that we have to pay a higher price as compared to another state. Then, first one over. The second one, the goods bought by him or agreed to be bought by him suffer from more than 1 or 2 defects. So, if you are a consumer, think about it. You have bought certain goods. Let's say you buy a bike or you buy a 2-wheeler and it clearly has defects in it. Then can you go and make a complaint saying that this is a violation of the Consumer Protection Act? So, point number 2. While point 2 applies to goods, point 3 applies to services. Okay, any services hired or availed by him which suffer from any deficiency. The next one, a trader or a service provider. So, a trader of goods or a service provider has charged for the services a price which is in excess of the price. So, there is a certain price which is fixed by law. Okay. Now, above this price, they are charging a higher price. So, if it is fixed by law, then that is only the price that you're supposed to pay for it. But this person is charging you a higher amount, or he's charging an amount higher than what is there in the packet. Like, let's say a dairy milk costs 10 rupees, but then the trader is asking me to pay 20 rupees for it. And the third one, it is displayed on a price list which is shown by the trader himself under a particular law or anything which is agreed for between parties. So, 4 points. if a trader or a service provider has charged excess of price in comparison to what? Anything which is fixed by law, anything which is in the price mentioned in the package itself, the price displayed by the trader himself because he has an obligation under law to display that price, or if it is agreed between both the parties. Okay, so now we've covered 4 points under why you can go for complaint: unfair contracts, unfair restrictive trade practices, deficiency in goods, deficiency in services, and there is an excess in price compared to those 4 points. The fifth one is where the goods are hazardous to life and safety when they are offered to sale for the public. Let's assume that a particular palm oil is it can be healthy for you, or I'm not using palm oil, let's say a coconut oil itself is healthy, but for whatever reason that particular coconut oil sourced by that company for that product is capable of causing harm to people. Now, simply because a person does not want to incur the losses, they will go ahead and sell and offer these goods to the public. And so, they are saying that goods which are hazardous to life and safety in contravention of safety standards, or when the trader himself knows them to be unsafe to the public. There are two criteria over here. If there is a safety standard, he has violated them, or if the trader himself knew that this is going to cause damage and went ahead and sold it to the public. Similarly to point 5, we have point 6. While this is for goods, we have this with regards to services. Services are anything which can be hazardous to life and safety of the public, and it is offered by someone who knows that it can cause harm. Let's say you go for let's say a theme park has opened up and everyone's very excited to go on the rides over there. Once, the owner of the theme park is well aware that no person has come and properly certified the safety of these rides. Low quality goods were being used just to complete the project faster, and when he knows this to be so, he can a complaint can be filed against him. Point number 7, a claim for product liability can arise against the product manufacturer himself, the seller, or the service provider. So we'll be studying a little bit about product liability a little later on. That is also included for complaint. Let's quickly summarize this. A complaint is with regards to any allegation in writing made by the complainant for obtaining a relief. With regards to what? With regards to any unfair contract or restrictive trade practices, any goods or services which had deficiencies in them, the price which was not in accordance with law or as displayed on the package, or the 2 other points, goods which are harmful to life and safety, services which are hazardous to life and safety, and lastly, product liability action. How to make a complaint? You make a complaint before one of these commissions, who we will be studying about little later on in this chapter. Okay. Normally, any complaint will always be accompanied by a fee, and you have to mention the name, description, address of the complainant, the address of the opposite parties, all the facts relating to it, and all the evidence to support your allegations. Now we're coming to the definition of a consumer himself. Okay, this definition, part 1 relates to goods and part 2 relates to services. So I will do only one part. We'll break it down entirely so that you can understand who exactly a consumer is, and the similar provision applies even for services. Let's break it down. Consumer means any person who buys any goods. This is the first part. He buys goods. When put yourself in the shoes of the consumer, you are going to go and buy something. So if you want that particular product, if you want, say, that dairy milk or the whatever things that you're buying, you have to give something in return. What is that something? That something is money. So this money only they are calling as a consideration. Okay, now this consideration can be paid or promised, or partly paid or partly promised. Okay, so it can be paid or it can be promised. Means you can choose to pay it at a later date, or you can do this partly. Okay, or under any system of deferred payment. So either you pay the full amount now and you take the goods and you come, or you say, okay, I'll pay 10 rupees right now, I'll pay 10 rupees later, or under any system of deferred payment. Deferred meaning nothing other than that you're going to pay it a little later on. Okay, so in short, I'll call it as a credit system. But you don't write it like this in your exam, you write it in the words as any system of deferred payment. Okay, so who's a consumer? He buys goods, and in return for what? For a consideration. Now this consideration can be fully paid up now or partly, promised or partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment. Now technically this is where the definition of consumer comes to an end, and the rest of it is a continuation. It's saying that and includes any user of such goods, okay, other than the person who bought such goods for consideration, which was paid or promised, or partly paid or partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment. In short, they're saying it includes a person who uses the goods. But who's using these goods? Not the person who actually made the payment of money or who's going to pay the money later on, someone else. Okay, but there's a criteria for this. When such use is made with the approval of the person who actually bought it. Okay, now again it breaks up over here, and then they say, but does not include a person who obtains such goods for resale or for commercial purpose. Now let's try to make sense of this definition again. If I'm a trader, I am buying 10 tons of sugar. Am I going to consume 10 tons of sugar? No, I am not. Okay, I probably would need only like 1 kg of sugar for a really long time. So what am I doing with 10 tons of sugar? Obviously I'm buying and selling. Okay, can I be a consumer in this particular area? Obviously not. So therefore the definition clearly says it does not include a person who is obtaining goods for resale or for any commercial purposes. Okay, now this commercial purpose part, there's an explanation, we'll come down to it a little later on, but let's break up the definition again. Consumer means any person who buys goods. When he buys goods, he's going to pay a consideration. That consideration can be can be paid or promised, or partly paid or partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment. This is your definition of consumer. It goes on to include any person who uses the goods. Who is using these goods? Who is using these goods other than the person who made a payment of consideration. And one condition is that if he is using the goods, it must be with the approval of such person. Now tell me, let's say A is the one who has paid 1,000 rupees for a particular goods. Okay, now A is walking home and then B assaults A, and then he's like, you give me whatever is in your pockets. So what does A do? A hands over the goods to him. Basically B is stealing these goods from A. Now B consumes these goods and then he falls sick. Can B be a consumer? Your argument can be that yes, he consumed the product and therefore he is sick. Okay, therefore he can go and file for he can go and file a complaint. But the definition clearly says the person who has bought the goods for money is only the consumer, and it includes anyone who is using the goods but with the permission of the original owner, of the person who had originally paid the money. And so therefore any stolen goods does not even come under the ambit of consumer. Okay, so I hope this definition is clear enough for you. The same concept applies even with regards to service. Let's read the definition of service just once. Okay. Consumer means any person who hires or avails of any service for a consideration which has been paid or promised, partly paid, partly promised, or under any system of deferred payment. Full stop. And includes any beneficiary of such service. So for goods, it is any person who's using the goods. But now it is like any beneficiary of such service. For example, who can be a beneficiary of a service? I have a Hotstar account. Hotstar account, my friend decides to use it, even though I am paying for it. So what is he doing? He is the beneficiary of that service. Okay. This beneficiary must be person other than the person who avails of services for a consideration which is paid or promised, partly paid, partly promised, or under system of deferred payment. When he must use these services with the approval of the first mentioned person. My friend must use my Hotstar account only with my permission and does not include anyone who is using it for a commercial purpose. So I hope this breakdown of definition of consumer is simple and easy to understand for you all. Okay. They go on to explain what you mean by commercial purpose. Okay. For commercial purpose, they're merely saying that, listen, even though I've mentioned commercial purpose, it does not include certain things. What is that? It does not include goods, the use of goods by a person who's bought it and used by him exclusively for the purpose of earning his livelihood by means of self-employment. Okay, what does this mean? Let's say that for my livelihood and for my self-employment, I wish to, I am a tailor, and being a tailor, I will need a machine. I will need the tailoring machine or whatever it is that I require. Now I buy that particular machine and I'm using this for a commercial purpose. Because through this machine only, I'm going to sell out embroidered garments, or I'm going to stitch garments and sell it out. And for this purpose, I am earning my livelihood. Now, technically, the definition does not include any person who's using it for a commercial purpose. So does it mean that if I buy these goods and it's defected, that I will not get any remedy under Consumer Protection Act? It doesn't make sense. And so therefore, they said that, okay, commercial purpose will exclude the concept where a person has bought an item, he's using it for his own livelihood, his own self-employment, and he's using it for a commercial purpose. We will exclude it from this definition, and he is also a consumer for this purpose. Okay. And then they went on to say the act of buying any goods or availing services also includes any action through electronic means, teleshopping, direct selling, or multi-level marketing. So this is so as to include the environment that we now live in with regards to the electronic marketplace. They go on to say that a person includes an individual, a firm, a HUF, cooperative society, AOP, corporation, artificial juridical person. So your definition of complaint, complainant, and the definition of goods and services is, or your consumer of goods and services, is very, very, very important. Okay. Why I call this definition as very important is because the following parts, that is, there are multiple case laws over here with regards to who a consumer is and how the courts have interpreted the same. I will call this as very important because these are the facts that will come as a practical question in your exam paper, and I will tell you how exactly they will ask the question. They will give you facts of a case. They will give you certain facts, and then they will say that, okay, Mr. X did so and so, he, etc., etc. Mr. Y has now approached the consumer court and comment what you think is going to be the decision of the Supreme Court. Now, how you'll have to answer this question is, you will have to write the definition of consumer, and then depending on which case law is given over here, you'll have to mention that case law and write, in this case law, in this case in this decision of the Supreme Court, the court has held so and so, and therefore in this matter Mr. Y has so and so remedy. That is why I am saying, please do not ever miss out any kind of case laws when you are studying through this chapter. Let's go through it one by one. The first one is the case of Lakshmi Engineering Works versus PSG Industrial Institute. Now, what was held over here was that, okay, in this case of Lakshmi Engineering Works versus PSG Industrial Institute, the court went ahead to try and understand, okay, are you a consumer if you are using your goods for commercial purpose? Okay. What was held in this case was, they said that if a person purchased a machine to operate it himself for earning his livelihood, then technically he is a consumer. Even if he took the assistance of 2 or more people to help him operate the machine, he would still be the consumer. But if he bought the machine and then he delegated the function entirely to someone else to run and operate the machine, then he would not be the consumer. Okay. So to take for example, I am a person, let's say I have a lot of cash flow. Someone approaches me and then they're like, okay, can you buy the car on behalf of me, and I will pay you money back. You buy the car for me right now and give it to me. I will engage in a transport service, etc., and I will pay you back. Now in this case, I bought the car and I have delegated the function of driving that car and making a business out of it to another person. Do I become the consumer? Definitely not. The other person, technically he will be the consumer. But if I bought the car and then I am itself running it, I'm doing a transport services and I'm doing it for the purpose of my livelihood, then I will be a consumer. Okay. Next one is Bhupendra Jang Bahadur versus regional manager. In this case, this person purchased a tractor and he used it to work on his own land. But when the tractor is free at times, he decided to be very entrepreneurial and he decided, okay, fine, I will hire out my tractor during the free time so that other people can use it at that time and I'll collect money from them. At this point, the court, the National Commission went ahead to say that you are still a consumer. You are primarily using it for your own purpose. In your free time, because you're lending it out to someone else, it doesn't make you it doesn't completely chuck you out of the ambit of who a consumer is. Okay. The main one came with the case of Narasamma versus LIC India, wherein they held that a consumer includes the beneficiary of a service. Remember I said another person can use the goods with my permission. Another person can use the services with my permission. So in this case, the beneficiary of the service other than the original consumer was a widow. Okay. The widow was the beneficiary of the service and therefore is a consumer and under the Act, and she was entitled to the compensation of loss suffered by her due to the negligence of LIC. What are they talking about over here? Who takes out an LIC insurance plan? Let's say a person A took out a LIC insurance plan. Now, who is the beneficiary of this service? A himself. Now, A is like, see, this is a life insurance policy. So, what is a life insurance policy? Only when A dies, LIC will pay out a certain sum of money to whoever is the nominee or the beneficiary of A. In this particular case, A's widow is only the person approaching the court. And LIC would have said something like, the widow is not the beneficiary of the service and therefore how can she come and file this complaint before us? The court went on to say that consumer includes a beneficiary of the service, especially where the widow of a consumer is definitely the beneficiary of the service, and therefore LIC has to compensate her as a consumer. This is also very important. Okay. in Lakshmi Chand Shah versus Saket Ben Kanji Chandan, they held, this was with regards to a lease agreement between a landlord and a tenant. Okay, interesting over here, what happened was, the tenant went and filed this matter before the court, stating that, see, I am paying rent to the landlord, and therefore the landlord has to maintain, he has to maintain the building, he has to repair, he has to clean the building, he has to do everything with respect to the building. Okay, and therefore this tenant took him to the court because the said landlord did not do the same thing. But the court took a slightly different stance on this. They said that if the lease agreement does not provide for any provision in respect of cleaning, repairing, maintaining the building, then the rent paid by the tenant is not the consideration for availing these services. So please try to understand that when you are a tenant, let's say you're paying 10,000 rupees as rent. Okay. Now, the rent is, why you're giving the rent? You're giving the rent because you are taking out that person's space, and then you are going to be living in it, or you're going to be running your business in it, or whatever it is. Now, apart from this, you are paying an additional 3,000 rupees as maintenance charges. Okay, this maintenance charges is the charges taken by the landlord for the purpose of cleaning, repairing and maintaining the building. So in this case, we can say that you have given a consideration for services. But what happens if that person does not end up giving this consideration and that only the rent is paid? Then obviously this rent does not mean that the landlord has to clean, repair or maintain any part of the building, and therefore the court said there is no question of deficiency in service. So this was a slightly different way in which the court looked at it. Please try to understand. You must remember, it's saying that where there is no provision in the lease agreement. If the lease agreement clearly stated that 10,000 rupees includes all of these things, then the landlord is definitely liable for providing these services. Okay. And lastly, we have the case of Northwestern Railway versus Sanjay Shukla. Have any of you all ever gotten into a train and missed your train? Now, I don't travel by train that much, so obviously there's no chance of me missing my train and things like that. But whatever form of transport it is that you've taken, in this particular case, what's happened was, this person is traveling by train and there was a delay in arrival of the trains, and this delay was not at all justifiable, and these delays were they were constantly happening. Okay. Now, what the court went ahead to say was that, see, the railways have to provide certain justification as to why their trains are late or delayed. Okay. But however, the railways cannot be expected to sit and explain to each and every passenger as to why the train is delayed, etc., etc. There are some cases where explaining the delay may not be possible, and therefore the court said that this is not you can't put the blame entirely on the railways itself. So let's read it. They said that the railways were required to explain the delay in which the railways failed, but it also said that every passenger's time is precious and they might have booked tickets for a further long journey. So unless the railways cannot establish and prove that the delay occurred beyond their control, or there was some other justification of the delay, the railways will have to pay compensation for that delay. Okay. So simply put, if it was within the control of the railways, then they should pay compensation. But if it was outside of their control, they do not have any justification or explanation for it, then it's out of their control. They can't be sitting and compensating each and every passenger. So these are your case laws, guys, with regards to, we're still talking about the definition of consumer with regards to goods and services. So quick recap, we have Lakshmi Engineering Works versus PSG Industrial Institute, Bhupendra Jung Bahadur versus the regional manager, we have Narasamma versus LIC, Lakshmi Ben Lakshmi Chand Shah versus Saket Ben Kanji Chandan, Northern Western Railway versus Sanjay Shukla. 5 case laws, please keep it in mind. These are very important from your exam point of view.